Good morning children, I am Sanamas here. How are you all? Hope you all are fine. Okay, hope you all are reading the textbook and doing the text back exercises. Okay, we started with our 12th chapter, Reproduction in Plants. We will just quickly go through what we have learned in the last class. Okay, reproduction in plants. First thing, we have to know why reproduction is important. Reproduction is important because our generation has to go on. So for that, reproduction is important. All the living organisms have a unique or special characteristic feature, that is the reproduction. It is the ability to produce its own kind. Now, when it comes to plants, we studied there are two parts of the plant. That is the roots, stem and leaf. They are called the vegetative part of the plant. And when new plants are grown from these parts, we call it asexual reproduction or vegetative propagation. Next, flowers are the reproductive part of the flower. So they are having the male and female reproductive parts, and after their fertilization only seeds are formed. Okay, we saw about the asexual reproduction, that is the new plants are grown from the root, stem and leaves. This is since it is new plants are grown from this vegetative parts, we call it asexual reproduction. Only one parent is involved there. Single parent is involved in asexual reproduction. And it is very quick compared to the sexual reproduction. Okay, we saw different methods of asexual reproduction. One is the cutting, that is in a rose or a jasmine, when you take a piece of stem with a bud or a node. Node means it is a place where leaf is attached. When you bury it in the soil and when you pour water, it grows into a new plant. Again, from roots also new plants are grown. Then leaf, that is the bryophyllum, is a leaf where the leaf tips of the leaves will be growing into buds, and these buds are capable of growing into a new bryophyllum plant. Then next we saw about fragmentation, that is the long parent body will be breaking into small bits. So these small bits are called the fragments. This will be growing into a new plant. Then budding, we saw it in case of yeast. The parent body will give out small structures called buds. These buds will be growing into the new plants. Then we saw about the fragmentation. Then spore formation, that is bread mold and some ferns. Spores are formed. These spores will be growing into a new plant. Okay, that is about the asexual reproduction. That is what we saw in the last class. It was a quick recap of last class. Now in this video we will be discussing about the sexual reproduction in plants. So we saw that the flower is the reproductive part of the plant. So now we will see what all the parts are there in a flower. We know that there is a green color part. It is called the sepals. Then the colored part is called the petals. Those are very attractive parts in the flowers. When it in the middle of the flower, you have two parts, that is the stamens and pistil. So we will see what this is. Stamens, these are the male reproductive part of the flower. Pistil, these are the female reproductive part of the flower. Now we will see what is bisexual flower and what is unisexual flower. I told you the pistil is the female reproductive part of the flower and stamens are the male reproductive part of the flower. When the stamens and the pistils, when they are present in the same flower, it is called the bisexual flowers. So for example, you can take a hibiscus flower or a shoe flower. You can see the stigma and the you can see all the yellow structures on it. Those, that is called the stamens, are yellow structures found on the flower. So in this, both are there, that is the male and the female, that is the pistil and the stamens, both are present in the same flower. So that is called a bisexual flower. In some plants like cucurbita and papaya, you have unisexual flowers, that is they will be having only stamens, or they will have only the female reproductive part, that is the pistil. So this will be in the separate flowers. Male flowers are separate with stamens, the female flowers are separate with the pistil. So those are called the unisexual flowers. Okay, now we will see what a stamen is. Okay, when you take a stamen, I told you it is the male reproductive part of the flower. So the stamen, it is having two parts. One is the long thread-like, that is the filament, and the bilobed structure, it is called the anther. So the anther and the filament both together are called the stamen. The anther is the lobed structure. Inside the anther only you will get the pollen grains. Those are the male reproductive units. These pollen grains are found inside the anther. So this anther will have a long stalk-like structure, that is called the filament. So the filament and the anther both together is called the stamen. So I told you inside the anther you will have pollen grains. These pollen grains are the male reproductive units or the male gametes. Now next, coming to the female reproductive part, that is the pistil. So this pistil, it consists of three parts. On top you will have stigma. You will have a long tube-like structure called the style, and underneath you will have a small bulged portion, that is called the ovary. So stigma, style and ovary together will give you the pistil. Now inside the this stigma, this is very sticky part, and only on this portion the pollen grains will be landing. The pollen grains will put forth small tubes, pollen tubes, that will reach the bulged portion, ovary. The ovary is having eggs. So only in the ovary the fusion of the male and female gametes take place, and later on you get a zygote within the ovary. Now that will form the ovule, and later this will be present inside the seeds which will grow into a new plant later on. Okay, so now pistil, I will tell you once again, you have a stigma, a long style and a bulged portion, that is called the ovary. Okay, this ovary will have the eggs. This is the female reproductive part or the female gamete. So the male is pollen grain. You get it from the stamen, that is from the anther. Female is the egg that is present inside the ovary. So this is about the female reproductive part. Okay. Now I told you fusion. Fusion of the male and female will give you a part called zygote. Okay. Now we will see how this fusion takes place. For that you have to know another term that is called pollination. That is the transfer of pollen grains from the anthers to the stigma. That is called the pollination. I told you the stamen means it is having an anther and a filament. This anther is having the pollen grains, that is the male reproductive structures. Now this pollen grain will be reaching the stigma, that is the female reproductive part. Stigma, through the style it will enter the ovary. So that is how the fusion takes place. So now the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of the pistil is called the pollination. So how this is happening? This will happen through the winds. When the anther lobes are matured, the pollen grains will come out, and through wind or when the insect is coming to visit a flower, the pollen grain will stick to the legs of the insect, and when the insect goes to sits on the other flower, the pollen grains are transferred to the flowers. So the transfer of pollen grains from the stamen, that is the anther of the stamen, to the stigma of the pistil, it is called the pollination. Now there are two types of pollination. One is the cross pollination and another one is self pollination. Okay, first we will see about self pollination. I told you the male and the female are present in the same flower. So the anther, the pollen grains falling from the stamen of the same flower to the stigma of the same flower, it is called the self pollination. So in a plant you will have lot of flowers. So the pollen from one flower will be falling to the pollen of the stigma of the another flower of the same plant. So that is also self pollination. So self pollination means the pollen grain of the same flower falling on to the stigma of the same flower. It is called the self pollination. Okay, now what is cross pollination? Cross pollination means the pollen grain from one flower, that is the pollen grain from the stamen of one flower, will be falling to the stigma of the another plant of the same variety in a different place. So that is called the cross pollination. So I will repeat once again. Cross pollination means the pollen grain of the one flower will be falling or will be transferred to the stigma of some other flower. That is some other flower means of the same varieties. Maybe the hibiscus plant will be maybe there will be 2 or 3 in a plot, 2 or 3 in a small area, 4 or 5. So from one plant the pollen grains will be transferred to the flower or the stigma of another flower. So of the same variety of the plant. For hibiscus means it will fall on the hibiscus only, but to a different plant. So that is called the cross pollination. So pollination means it is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Now self pollination means the anther of the pollen grain of one flower will be falling on to the stigma of the same flower. That is called the self-pollination. Cross-pollination means the pollen grain of one flower will be falling to another flower of a different plant but of the same variety. That is called the cross-pollination. Topic is fertilization. So I told you, after pollination, the pollen grains from the male will reach to the stigma of the female. So through the style, the pollen tube will be growing and it will reach the ovary where egg is present. So when the male gamete reaches the egg, fertilization takes place. After this only you get a cell called the zygote. So now this process of fusion of the male and female gamete to form a zygote is called fertilization. The cell after fertilization, the zygote will divide and it will have a embryo. So this embryo will be present inside the seed. This will be growing into a new plant in future. So this inside the seed, mango seed and all, you can see that the embryo is present. When you take the small the green gram or the black gram which you use for the which you use in kitchen, you put it in, soak it in water and you can observe all these things. Okay, so I will repeat once again. I told you the male and female. The male reproductive part is called the stamens. The stamen is having a anther and filament. The anther will have the pollen grains, which is the male reproductive units or the male gametes. Now female reproductive unit is called the pistil. The pistil is having three parts, that is the stigma, style and ovary. Now this ovary is having the egg. Now on the stigma only the pollen grains will come and land, and the pollen tubes will be passing through the style to reach the ovary for fertilization. Okay, now I told you about bisexual flower and unisexual flower. Unisexual flower means both the male and female are present. Both the stamen and the pistil are present in the same flower. So it is a bisexual flower. In case of papaya and cucurbits, male flower is separate, female flower is separate. So that is, the pistil will be in a separate flower, the stamen will be in a different separate flower. So that is called the unisexual flowers. So now next is pollination, that is the transfer of the pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of the female is called the pollination. So there are two types of pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination means the pollen grains of the same flower will be falling on the stigma of the same flower or a different flower of the same plant. So that is a self-pollination. Cross-pollination means the stigma will be, the pollen grain will be falling from one flower to another flower of another plant but of the same variety. So this is the cross-pollination. So we saw about fertilization, that is the process of fusion of the male and female is called the fertilization. After fertilization, the cell formed is called the zygote. So the zygote is present, this zygote will further divide and form the embryo. So this embryo will be present inside the seed and this is the baby plant. Okay children, I hope you understood this. We will see the rest in the next video. So go through the textbook. Read each and every line of your textbook. Learn the spellings. You have come across so many new words in this. That is the stamen, anther, then filament, then stigma, style, ovary, ovules, fertilization, pollination. All these terms are new to you all. So please write down the spellings and study it. We will see in the next video. Hope you all understood this. Thank you.